What if the state most people write off as a retirement destination and a theme park parking lot has been quietly shaping the way the entire world eats for over 100 years? What if the drink in your gym bag, the pie on your diner menu, and the container holding your leftovers in the fridge right now all trace their origin back to one humid, strange, and wildly underestimated peninsula hanging off the bottom of America? Florida doesn't show up in food history textbooks. But maybe it's time it did. Hi, my name is David and this is Food Origins, the show where we pull back the curtain on the foods you think you know and reveal the places, the people, and the moments that actually created them. Food 1. Key lime pie. Let's start with the most obvious one. Because even here, most people only know half the story. Key lime pie was born in the Florida Keys in the late 1800s, not in a professional kitchen. It came from a fishing household where fresh milk was scarce, ovens were unreliable, and the heat made everything complicated. A cook known simply as Aunt Sally, who worked for a Key West sponge fishing magnate named William Curry, combined wild key limes with sweetened condensed milk and egg yolks, and created something that had never existed before. Now here is the part that stops people cold. The original key lime pie required no baking at all. The acid in the lime juice chemically thickens the filling on its own, so no heat is needed. This no-bake pie was invented in a place with no reliable oven. That is not a coincidence. That is genius born from necessity. And if anyone serves you one made with green food coloring, walk away. Food 2. The Cuban sandwich. Now this one is going to start an argument in Florida the moment this video goes live. Good. The argument is part of the story. The Cuban sandwich is pressed golden and crispy, layered with roasted pork, ham, Swiss cheese, pickles, and mustard. A sandwich so perfectly engineered, it feels like it was designed by extremely hungry geniuses. Most people assume it came from Havana. It did not. It was born in Tampa's Ybor City in the late 1800s, where Cuban, Spanish, and Italian workers packed into cigar factories and needed lunch that was fast, cheap, and filling. Here is the detail that makes historians excited. The Tampa version includes Genoa salami, no Cuban origin whatsoever. It is there because Italian and Cuban workers shared the same factory floors every single day until their food merged the same way their lives did. Miami has its own version without the salami. The two cities have been arguing for over a century. I am not picking a side. Food 3. Frozen concentrated orange juice. I want you to picture the most boring sentence in the history of food. Are you ready? Here it is. Frozen concentrated orange juice. I know. Stay with me, because this one actually rewired the American morning. Before 1948, orange juice was not a daily habit for most Americans. Oranges were eaten whole. Juice was considered a luxury. It was fragile, it spoiled quickly, and it was impossible to ship any meaningful distance without losing quality. If you did not live near a citrus grove, fresh orange juice was something you had maybe a handful of times in your entire life. That changed at the University of Florida in Gainesville, where a team of researchers developed a process to remove almost all the water from fresh orange juice, freeze the concentrated result, and then restore it later by simply adding water back. The flavor survived, vitamin C survived, and suddenly, a glass of Florida citrus could travel to a kitchen in Minnesota in January and taste like something real. Here is the detail that makes this even more remarkable. The technology was originally accelerated by the United States military, which had been desperately searching for a way to deliver vitamin C to troops overseas during World War II. The program did not reach soldiers in time to matter during the war. But within a few years of the war ending, it reached every American kitchen in the country. Before Florida's orange juice industry took off, most Americans had never tasted orange juice more than a handful of times in their entire lives. One scientific breakthrough in one Florida University laboratory quietly rewired the American breakfast table forever. Food for Gatorade. This is the one. If you only remember one food from this entire video, remember this one. 1965. University of Florida in Gainesville. An assistant football coach named Dwayne Douglas walks into the office of a kidney disease researcher named Dr. Robert Cade and asks a question that sounds almost embarrassingly simple. Why do our players stop sweating in the Florida heat, and why do so many of them collapse? Cade and his research team spent weeks studying the Florida Gators football players, measuring exactly what their bodies were losing during practice sessions in the brutal, suffocating Florida humidity. They arrived at a formula: water, sodium, sugar, potassium, phosphate, and lemon juice. A precise cocktail that replaced exactly what sweat was stripping away. The first batch reportedly tasted so terrible that the players nearly refused to drink it. I love that detail. The most successful sports drink in human history almost got rejected by a college football team in 1965 because it tasted awful. Cade's wife suggested adding lemon flavoring. That small domestic suggestion, made in a Florida kitchen, turned a laboratory formula into a drinkable product and then into a cultural phenomenon. Gatorade is now a $5 billion a year brand, sold in over 80 countries. The University of Florida has earned over $280 million in royalties from its invention. Coaches have had it poured over their heads after championships for 60 years. All because a coach asked a question about why his players were collapsing in the Florida sun, and a scientist decided to actually find out. Born from heat, built for endurance. Quintessentially Florida. Food 5, the grouper sandwich. Not every food revolution happens in a laboratory or a factory or a cigar worker's lunch break. Some happen at a wooden picnic table on a dock that smells like salt water and motor oil and something frying nearby. The grouper sandwich is not famous outside of Florida the way key lime pie or Gatorade is famous. But inside Florida, it is something close to sacred. A thick fillet of fresh grouper, lightly breaded, fried or grilled, served on a soft bun with lettuce, tomato, and a squeeze of lemon. The kind of lunch that makes you close your eyes for a second after the first bite. It was born along the waterfront fish houses and dockside shacks of Tampa Bay and the Gulf Coast in the mid-20th century. These were places where fishermen sold their daily catch directly to small restaurants that had no freezers, no supply chains, and no interest in anything that was not pulled from the water that morning. What made the grouper sandwich iconic was never the technique. It was the proximity. Fish to water to fryer in hours, sometimes less. Here is the thing most people do not realize. Grouper is one of the most frequently substituted fish in American restaurants. Studies suggest that in some markets, over a third of the fish sold as grouper is actually a cheaper species entirely. In Florida, ordering a grouper sandwich from a decades-old waterfront spot is not just a meal. It is an act of trust, a connection to a fishing culture that still believes the best food is the food that comes from exactly where you are standing. Food 6. Stone crab claws. There are foods that taste expensive, and then there are foods that taste like the ocean decided to show off. Stone crab claws, cracked open at the table, served chilled with a sharp mustard dipping sauce, are one of the great luxury seafood experiences in the world, and they belong almost entirely to Florida. The stone crab industry was pioneered in Miami Beach in the 1920s by a restaurateur named Joe Weiss, who began serving the claws at his small waterfront restaurant after a marine biologist from the University of Miami suggested they were edible and worth trying. Before that, stone crabs were largely ignored. Fishermen threw them back. Diners had never considered them. But here is the detail that makes this story genuinely extraordinary. Stone crabs regenerate their claws. Fishermen remove one claw and return the crab to the water alive, where it grows the claw back over the course of about a year. It is one of the only seafood industries in the world built on a renewable, self-replenishing harvest. Joe Weiss did not set out to invent a sustainable seafood model. He just wanted something interesting to put on his menu, but what he stumbled into was accidentally one of the most ecologically responsible food industries ever created. Marine conservationists still point to it today as a model worth studying. A luxury food that gives back. In Florida, even the indulgence has a conscience. Food. 7. Tupperware. Okay. I can already hear some of you. Tupperware is not a food, David. And you are technically correct, but Tupperware changed the way the entire world stores, preserves, and shares food. So it is staying on this list. I make the rules here. Tupperware was born in Kissimmee, Florida in 1946. A chemist and inventor named Earl Tupper took a piece of polyethylene slag, which is essentially industrial waste from oil refineries, and molded it into a lightweight, airtight container with a patented seal that kept food fresher longer than anything that had existed before. Before Tupperware, leftovers were covered with plates or wax paper. Refrigerators leaked odors between dishes. Food waste in the average American household was enormous. Tupper's invention solved a problem so fundamental that most people did not even know they had it until the solution appeared in their hands. But here is the detail that rewrites the entire story. Tupperware barely sold in stores. It was a woman named Brownie Wise, a single mother from Georgia, who invented the Tupperware party model in the early 1950s. She turned the product into a social phenomenon by selling it through networks of women in their own living rooms. She generated over $1 million in sales before most Americans had ever seen Tupperware on a retail shelf. Florida did not just invent a plastic container, it accidentally invented a new model for how women could build economic independence in post-war America. That is not a food story. That is a revolution. Stored in plastic, sealed with a satisfying burp. Food 8. Datil pepper hot sauce. Most people have heard of habaneros. Most people have heard of jalapenos. Almost nobody outside of northeastern Florida has heard of the Datil pepper, and that is exactly what makes it one of the most fascinating food stories in the entire state. The Datil pepper is a small, fruity, ferociously hot chili that grows almost exclusively in and around St. Augustine, Florida, the oldest continuously occupied European settlement in the United States. Its heat rivals the habanero, but its flavor is something entirely different. Sweet, fruity, and complex in a way that most super hot peppers simply are not. It is more interested in seducing your palate than punishing it. The most widely accepted theory traces the Datil back to the Minorcan immigrants who arrived in Florida in the 1760s, brought over as indentured laborers from the Mediterranean island of Minorca to work on indigo plantations. They carried their food culture with them, including this specific pepper, across the ocean and into the Florida soil. Local families in St. Augustine have been making Datil pepper hot sauce from private recipes for generations, passing them down like heirlooms between grandmothers and grandchildren who guard those formulas like state secrets. In a world where hot sauce has become a billion-dollar industry built on celebrity endorsements and viral challenges, the Datil remains stubbornly, beautifully local, a flavor that still belongs to the people who never left. Food 9. Hearts of palm. Not every Florida food was born from ambition or a laboratory or an immigrant's lunchbox. Some were born from pure, unadorned hunger. Hearts of palm, known in Florida simply as swamp cabbage, was a survival food long before it became a delicacy. Harvested from the inner core of the sabal palm, Florida's official state tree, by the Seminole people and early Florida settlers who needed calories in a landscape that was hot, wet, and not particularly interested in making eating easy. The process of getting to it is violent and irreversible. The entire tree must be cut down to reach the tender ivory white core at its center. What you find inside tastes faintly of artichoke, silky and mild, with a texture that is somehow both crisp and yielding at the same time. Here is the twist. Hearts of a palm today appear on upscale restaurant menus all over the world. They are sold in glass jars at specialty grocery stores for prices that would make a Florida settler laugh until they cried. And they are now being used as a plant-based meat substitute in vegan cooking, shredded to mimic pulled pork or crab. A food that kept desperate settlers alive in the Florida wilderness is now being reimagined as the future of sustainable eating. Florida's most humble food has quietly become one of its most forward-thinking, which, when you think about it, is a very Florida thing to happen. Food 10. Everglades seasoning. Most spice blends live quietly in the back of a cabinet, forgotten between uses, slowly expiring behind the paprika you bought 3 years ago and never opened. Everglades seasoning does not do that. In Florida kitchens, at backyard cookouts, and in fishing camps across the state, this all-purpose seasoning blend has the kind of devoted following that most spice companies spend decades trying to manufacture and never quite achieve. It was created in 1988 by Jeff Mack in LaBelle, Florida, a small rural town sitting at the edge of the actual Everglades. He designed it to capture the flavor of Florida outdoor cooking, bold, savory, slightly smoky, with a warmth that builds slowly and lingers long after the meal is over. He reportedly developed it to season wild game and fresh-caught fish. The kind of cooking that happens at the edge of a marsh at sunset with no recipe and no audience. It never got a national marketing campaign. It never had a celebrity endorsement. It spread entirely by word of mouth, by Floridians handing it to relatives, tucking it into suitcases, and shipping it to transplants who moved north and could not find it anywhere else. In a food world completely obsessed with scale and reach and market penetration, Everglades seasoning is quiet proof that the most loyal audience is always the one that feels like the product was made specifically for them. In this case, it genuinely was. Food 11. Florida cracker beef. We have talked about pies and sandwiches and sports drinks and spice blends. But we have not yet talked about the food that made all of those other Florida foods possible. The food that fed the people who built the state before any of this existed. Florida cracker beef comes from the Florida cracker cattle breed, one of the oldest and most historically significant cattle breeds in North America. Descended from cattle brought to Florida by Spanish explorers in the 1500s, these animals spent 4 centuries adapting to the Florida wilderness on their own. The heat, the humidity, the insects, the scrubby, difficult terrain. The Florida cowboys who worked these cattle, called crackers after the sound of their whips, developed an entire food culture built around open fire cooking, smoked meats, and using every single part of the animal because, out in the Florida scrublands, nothing was wasted. This is arguably the oldest food tradition in Florida. 500 years before Gatorade, 500 years before Tupperware, 500 years before key lime pie, Spanish cattle were running wild through Florida, and a small community of people was figuring out how to feed themselves from the land and what was on it. Today, Florida cracker beef is experiencing a quiet revival. Small farms across Central Florida are raising the breed again, and chefs are putting it on menus specifically because the flavor carries something that modern commercial beef simply cannot replicate. 400 years of adaptation, written into the meat itself. Florida did not start with theme parks and beach resorts. It started with fire and cattle and people who had to figure out survival one meal at a time. Everything else came after. 11 foods, one state, and a story that most people walking through an airport in Orlando have absolutely no idea they are standing inside of. From the survival cooking of the Florida Keys to the laboratories of the University of Florida. From the cigar factory floors of Ybor City to a fishing dock on the Gulf Coast, where the grouper went from the water to the fryer before lunch. Florida has been quietly, persistently, and brilliantly shaping the way the world eats, drinks, stores its food, and seasons its meat for over 500 years. It was never just beaches and theme parks. It was always something stranger, something richer, something worth knowing. I am David. This is Food Origins. If this changed the way you see Florida, or honestly the way you see your own refrigerator, hit that like button and subscribe. Tell me in the comments which one of these 11 surprised you the most. I have a feeling this one is going to divide people, and I am very much here for that conversation.